Herzlich willkommen zu 99:1. Welcome to 99:1. This is an English episode. My name is Nadim, and today we're talking again about the war on Iran. And for the Iran, does one say Iran in English or Iran? Like what we say, Iran. In any case, in any way, yeah. Basically, what I wanted to get to is that we are following quite a few international authors and analysts, and one of them that I have been reading rather closely in the last 2-3 weeks actually is a Substack called Policy Tensor, and that's also an X account. You can find it. We will of course also link it here in the video. And yeah, I reached out to the author of this Substack, Anusar Farooqui, and I'm gonna pull him right in. Welcome to 99:1, Anusar. Nice to have you here.
Happy to join.
So the reason why I found your writing and your analysis so interesting is that, yeah, it's quite different from at least the mainstream that we receive here in Germany when it comes to analyzing the war in Iran. We say Iran, right, in English too, or do you say Iran?
Iran, and if you have a very strong accent, you say Iran.
Iran, yes, Iran, and then it's like you have to run away and say Iran.
Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan.
All right. But before we talk about Iran, maybe a short intro so that we introduce Anusar. Anusar is a writer, analyst, and finance professional specializing in economics, investment, strategy, and public policy. He holds a PhD from McGill University, and he is the CEO of a company called Systematic Portfolios. As I already said, he writes Policy Tensor. That's a Substack. You can find him there, but he also contributes to Unheard, The New Statesman, and Phenomenal World. Definitely easy to just Google his name and you'll find a lot of these outlets and articles. Yeah, Anusar, anything else to mention regarding you, or should we go right in?
You covered it all for me.
Okay, awesome. So let's maybe start a bit from the beginning. The war is now nearly 3 weeks ongoing. Let's talk maybe a little bit about the war goals of both Israel and the US. So what do you assess the Israel-US war goals to be? Are they actually the same, or can we say that they are distinct? If they are distinct, what's the relationship between the two? And maybe also speak a little bit about how that has influenced the progress of the war so far.
So it's been long-standing Iranian and US policy to weaken Iran. Israeli and US policy to weaken Iran.
Yes.
And what seems to have happened here is that Bibi Netanyahu has convinced Trump, or did convince him end of last year, early this year, that Iran was tottering, was extremely weak, was facing tremendous political challenges, and was economically, the whole mix was ready to blow. And that if you just really hit it hard enough, the regime would topple and accomplish a 50-year-old goal of US foreign policy, and a long-standing goal of Israeli policy, including a personal goal, very long-standing personal goal of Bibi Netanyahu.
Right.
So in terms of the core war aims of toppling this regime or weakening it as much as possible, there is no daylight between Israel and the United States. However, the Israelis have a very high risk appetite and they have a very high pain tolerance. They are willing to pay a lot more and tolerate a lot more pain to crush this regime, to weaken it very substantially. This is not true of the United States. Trump is not prepared to pay the political costs that are now beginning to mount, or the escalation risks that are now beginning to mount. And this creates a major wedge between the two, and we'll see how this interacts in terms of war planning and responses to developments in the war. But as far as goals are concerned, there is no daylight. But as far as tolerance of risks and costs are concerned, there is a massive amount of daylight between the two.
Right. I mean, one thing that became quite apparent just yesterday was this bombing of another, I think, oil or gas facility in Iran by the Israelis, and there's like this this back and forth going on where Trump says, yeah, he didn't order that, he didn't know about it. Netanyahu says, yes, that's true, he didn't know about it. Some other people in the Israeli security environment said, no, he did know, he approved it. So what do you think is going on there? Or can you, and on this example, maybe show that relation a bit?
So the Israelis, because of this gap that I told you, they want to go after water systems, they want to go after electricity production, they want to go after basic systems, energy systems, obviously above all, gas and oil infrastructure in Iran. They want to demolish all of it.
They want to basically obliterate Iran as a state.
Yes, they would very much like to do that.
Yeah.
The problem is that the Iranians have not been disarmed so that they can strike back.
Right.
Which means in particular that they can respond and destroy Gulf energy infrastructure in response to attacks on Iranian energy infrastructure. What this means is that, and the Gulf infrastructure is much more exposed than Iran's. And the Iranians are willing to pay a very high price to win this war, which means that Iranians have a kind of escalation dominance. So what happens in the past 2 days is that the Israelis first struck South Pars gas field, a major gas facility in Iran, one of the primary producers of energy there. And the Iranians responded in a declared statement, we're going to attack this, and this, and systematically attacked gas fields in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, and in Qatar. So this was and then Trump goes on Twitter and says, Israel will not fire another round at this. Right? And so this is a signal that is like, okay, we'll back off, right? And so this makes it very, very clear that Iran enjoys escalation dominance in this specific sense. If you escalate to higher counter-value attacks against Iran, Iran will respond with much bigger ripostes. And so it really matters that, because this blocks an avenue for ending the war for Israel and the United States. Because the United States does not have the pain tolerance to absorb this kind of attack, it destroys the world economy. If you keep going like this, if you keep exchanging strikes on oil and gas infrastructure, the world economy will find it very, very difficult to recover for years.
Right. And that's something that Israel cares less about.
Israel doesn't care very much about it. Israel can say, fuck the world economy. We'll pay $150 oil prices. We don't give a shit as long as we get rid of Iran, right? But the United States does very much. Trump cannot tolerate $150 oil prices for a year. It's just impossible for him to take that kind of political cost.
Yeah, and right, and hence you've been vocal on X about saying that very early on. Actually, you were talking about this like a week or 1.5 weeks ago already, that the U.S. is facing strategic defeat in Iran, which is of course like when somebody follows German traditional media, let's say, or mainstream media, they would be flabbergasted. They're like, well, how should this be possible? We are talking about like the 2 biggest militaries in the world. They have the heaviest bombs. They are actually bombing the whole country from top to bottom. They managed to take out spiritual and political leadership. And that basically also Iran is not only facing off these 2, because there's like a whole, cabal of Western states that are also chiming in, at least to some degree. The Gulf states.
How can it be that they're winning at all?
So exactly. So how do you get to this idea that U.S. is facing strategic defeat? Can you explain this?
Right before the war, I wrote a piece called "The Logic of Escalation in the Middle East," where I predicted how the Iranians would retaliate across the board. After the war began, I was just doing kind of disinterested analysis. I didn't have a dog in this fight, or more importantly, I did not go in with the prior that Iran was especially strong and could survive the war or anything like that. What I did was I analyzed this in a kind of mathematical model. But it's also, my analysis was, I discovered that the United States was facing strategic defeat. I did not come up with the idea and then find evidence to look for it. I looked at the evidence and I realized, fuck, this does not work. But let me tell you how I thought about this and the model that I know. So there are basically 3 theories of strategic air war. And these are long-standing theories. We have a century of air power now. The first theory was the Duhaitist theory. Duhait came up with the theory that if you pummel the enemy enough from the air, it will collapse the will to fight of the enemy. And the government would capitulate or fall or topple, and the society would be destroyed and cry uncle. So that is the coercive theory of air power. There is the interdiction theory of air power, which is the standard official US Air Force doctrine, which is that you interdict all the supply chains of the weapons that go to the fighting forces of the enemy. And if you interdict these enough, this is called deep interdiction or whatever, in the rear of the enemy's front, in the rear of the front, then you can reduce the enemy's ability to fight you. That is the sort of standard model of how air power is supposed to work. And then there is a certain more recent theory informed by Israeli thought, the assassination built on many decades of Israeli policies of assassinations around the world, but also on building on the precision strike revolution in the 80s, which convinced people that there was a guy named John Borden, Air Force officer, who designed the first campaign against Saddam in 1991. And this was the decapitation theory. And what it says was that if you attack the enemy's leadership, command and control systems, and so on, that could implode the state, that could implode the regime, and you could really buy your way into a quick victory. Of course, it has never worked, and it was not going to work. So as soon as it was clear that the decapitation strike, which they carried out systematically and extensively in the first 72 hours of the war, once that had failed, that Iran was not going to be kicked out of the war. It was not going to be defeated. The decapitation had failed. That was clear. Okay. We know from work by people like Robert Pape, who was the authority on the subject. He wrote the monograph on the subject called Bombing to Win many, many years ago now. He compiled systematic information on aerial campaigns, on aerial coercion, military coercion with the air weapon, and showed that it has not generated a single capitulation in over 100 campaigns. And the reason is because nation states are not like individuals that if you torture them, they will cry uncle at some point and spill the beans. Nation states are complex, internally functionally differentiated, complex things that can adapt and survive a lot of pain and this thing. So that is not possible. So, for example, Thomas Schelling, another theorist, designed the Rolling Thunder campaign in the mid 60s to punish North Vietnam in a progressively escalating way, to coerce it into coming to terms with the United States. That completely failed. The bombing of Germany went on for 3 years in the Second World War and failed. The bombing of Japan was extremely extensive, and Japan was specially exposed to aerial bombardment. But even that failed. It took the Soviet invasion of Manchuria and the destruction of the Kwantung Army to get Japan to capitulate. So we know, any informed observer, military analyst will tell you, to expect strategic bombing to yield a capitulation is stupid. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so coercion's gone, decapitation's gone. Interdiction is the only game in town. And interdiction is a serious theory of air power, right? Much more serious than the other two. The problem is threefold. One is that the Iranians made systematic preparations. They saw what the Israelis had done. They realized that they're going to come after their leadership. They're going to do a full decapitation strike, even if the United States does not get involved. And they prepared for it. They dispersed they delegated command. They dispersed their forces. They delegated command to regional commanders, 32 of them. And they essentially hardened and made sure that the system is resilient to annihilation at any one point. This created a very, very dispersed, resilient force structure and command structure in Iran. So the problem of interdiction became much, much harder. Now, what I did was I simply modeled this interdiction war. And I said, okay, here's the mechanics of an interdiction war, right? The enemy can produce these weapons. It's producing them at these 50 sites. It's making 100 of these weapons a month. What is the initial stockpile of his weapons? How many can you interdict from the air per month? That's the rate of interdiction. How much can the enemy reconstitute the same production sites and refill his coffers, refill his arsenal? That's the rate of reconstitution. And the difference of these two rates, or the ratio, tells you whether the graph of inventories goes down like this, or how fast it goes down, or whether it's climbing, right? So what I discovered when I modeled this that you need really absurd, extreme assumptions to get the time to exhaustion, the time at which you have disarmed Iran, down below 4 or 5 months, right? And I realized then that 4 or 5 months is too long politically. You cannot have $200 barrels of oil for 4 months. That's going to destroy the world economy, right? So the political cost will be so high for Trump that he will either have to back off or, basically will have lost the war politically, even if he prevailed militarily. And then there were further revisions to our stockpile estimates of stockpiles of interceptors, inventories of missiles and drones and so on. And I realized that this interdiction war is not being won at all. It is being lost. Iran is able to reconstitute and fire more, and it is the rate strike tempo has increased recently. So the problem is this: for the United States to win, there is only one path. You have to win the interdiction war. And there is no good solution to winning the interdiction war, not in time. In fact, the best estimates now suggest that it would take years at least to disarm Iran. And meanwhile, it'll have complete control over Hormuz. And that is a strategic defeat for the United States. And so I discovered this. I didn't invent it.
Right, and that's also why, like, the proposed ground invasion or some kind of Kurdish militias that get in and start fighting the regime, it won't really help you, because also that it's not something that is finished in a week or so.
Right. Just to say one thing, suppose that the Kurds and the Baluchis and the Azeris are all gung-ho about this, and you support them from the air, and this is the Afghan model, right? Ground forces down there, and American forces.
Yeah, or Libya, right? No, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And this has been called the Afghan model since 2001.
Right.
And suppose you do that and it succeeds. What do you get? You get statelets breaking out in northwestern Iran, close to Pakistan, and so on. And that doesn't change the fact that Iran can keep holding the entire Gulf assets at risk, keep striking Israel, keep striking American bases. It doesn't change the main math of the war. So it's not a solution. The Kurd island idea is even more harebrained, because what it does is it puts your forces in like frontline, absolutely exposed to Iranian fire. When you can't even defend your air bases, how do you expect to defend this force in Kurd island?
Yeah.
It's a harebrained scheme, and I think the military shut it down.
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason why they emptied all the bases just the moment that they started attacking Iran.
What was surprising was that they didn't think this through in the beginning. They thought that Iran would just capitulate.
That was what I was going to ask you, because it sounds so. I mean, of course, the calculations and the math might be a bit more complex, but in general, it sounds quite straightforward to get to this, insight. So I'm wondering, like, didn't somebody in the military? I know Trump, maybe he doesn't understand these things, but there must be like consultants that tell him this stuff and tell him like this is not winnable, no?
So, two things. One is that the model that I posted has been doing the rounds, and this is something that circulated a lot. And I've heard from a major investments firm saying we're looking at this, and our scientific teams looked at this and they're like, this is completely correct, right? And I know former officials, very senior officials in the National Security Council, who have written about it and shared notes with each other about it. I know that people in the White House have seen it, even if the principals haven't. But at least one or two people have seen it in the White House, from what I know. And so this is not, also the military this is a very standard model. The military can absolutely do this on their own. They don't need me to tell them to do this math, right? They can do this math. The question is whether their assumptions going into this were correct, and whether their intelligence assessments going into this were correct. I think that the military very openly warned Trump. And the media took from it that we will run the magazine depth down or something. We will run out of the missiles that we need for interceptors that we need for Asia or something. But that's what they focused on. They didn't focus. They just assumed that the United States was so powerful compared to Iran that Iran could just be crushed, that it would be a one-sided war of punishment, right? And so they thought that, they really, really believed that it would topple in three days.
Wow. But it's even worse than that. They can't. It's not just that they can't win this war. It's they also can't really stop it. I mean, there is this TACO acronym, Trump always chickens out or something, which goes back to his big talks and small attacks here and there, and then pulling back, like he did, for example, last year. But even that doesn't seem to be an option right now, right? So he can't really get out of this. He's not the one calling the end to this war, correct?
Right, right. So the taco is coined by Robert Armstrong of the Financial Times. He used it in the tariff war when that began. He's like, Trump always tacos. So it's become a very common term.
Become a thing, yeah.
That's how everybody talks about it now. So can Trump taco? Initially, the perception among the prestige media and the administrative officials and the leadership here was that Trump can just call this off, right?
He can claim victory and say, "Yeah, we won."
Just walk, just call it off. And I've been trying to persuade these people, very serious people, very, very senior people. I've been trying to persuade them that it's impossible because the Iranians are not going to stop firing. Suppose that you walk off and you say, mission accomplished, we have the greatest victory ever. And then you walk off and the Iranians are still attacking Israel. They're still attacking the Gulf monarchy. They're still attacking US bases in the region. That will be an extreme humiliation. You can't do that. You have to, at the minimum, obtain some kind of ceasefire. But the problem with war termination here is extremely difficult because the Iranians, their primary goal in this war now is to restore deterrence, is to make sure that they will not be attacked again by the United States and Israel. That's a very, very hard ask because how can you who in the world can tie the hands of the American president when it comes to war, right?
Right.
So it's a very difficult thing. So they need reassurance. So what can they do? Their theory of victory is that they can impose such political costs on Trump for attacking them that any future president will think twice or thrice before considering the idea of attacking Iran again. And so this is their backup theory of victory. The other possibility is they're willing to accept sanctions relief, they're willing to accept arms transfers, guarantees from the Russians and the Chinese that they will be resupplied if the war were to renew. And that might also work. And I'm trying to advise people. My contact in the White House, I sent him this whole note saying this is what we need to do to bring this war to a close if you want to bring this to a close. Otherwise, what's the out here? You have to persuade the Iranians to agree to a ceasefire. It's not easy.
There are some Western pundits that are still, in favor of this war. They basically say that why not? Why can't U.S. just not sit this out? They're not the ones suffering so much from the closure of Hormuz, and instead it's actually China that's suffering the most from it, Asia in general, and others even go so far to claim that hitting China and hitting one of China's very important energy supply lines, that was actually the purpose of that war. What would you say to this kind of narrating?
This is upside down. There's a professor named Dov Levin who really spelled out how China dramatically gains from this war. So the first huge massive gain is that the entire world is now looking for insurance against shocks coming from the Gulf, and they will embrace renewables and EVs and so on. And China is the world's great supplier of EVs and renewables and solar panels and so on. So the Chinese market, the commercial opportunity for China here is basically doubling, right? And so China is a big economic and commercial winner from this. China, of course, loses like the rest of the world from the high energy prices and the shock to fertilizer supplies and gas supplies and so on. And that's just universally true. There's no country in the world that's not suffering from this. But China does gain from learning how the United States fights with a mature precision strike power, right? So it's really important. Watching the United States fight against Afghanistan is not going to tell you what the U.S. military behaves like, or what its plans will look like, or what its operational tempo will look like, or whatever in the South China Sea or near Taiwan, right? But a real mature precision strike power like Iran, which is a really mature one, advanced in many ways, as advanced as the Russians and the Chinese. Fighting a power like that tells the Chinese a lot, and they're watching this with a microscope with their low Earth orbit satellites and so on. And so it's a big win for them just to learn how the United States operates. They can neutralize that. And the obvious third strategic aspect of this is, well, wouldn't it be amazing for the Chinese if the United States got bogged down here and tied down and had its capabilities tied down, just trying to subdue Iran for years, right? And that's a big win for China. if the U.S. Capabilities are tied down and all these missiles run out as they had been warning, then deterrence in Asia collapses. If the United States is physically incapable of defending Taiwan, you can just walk into Taiwan and take it.
Right. And I mean, this is actually one of the outcomes that you at least speak of, is that you are saying in one of your articles, I think it's even the title, that Iran now is the new regional hegemon of the Gulf, right? So obviously before that, probably Israel, the US. Now, because of this war, actually, and the way that it will conclude, most likely, Iran will be the new hegemon. How do you get to that? How so?
So the Iranians have okay. Let's try to think about this Hormuz weapon, as I've called it, right?
Right.
The Hormuz weapon is Iran's ability to control the flow of transit tankers and ships and so on from the Gulf to the rest of the world. This is a weapon against the world economy and the big powers, the Western powers far away. They can squeeze this and they squeal there. So that's a weapon against them. It's also a weapon against the Gulf monarchies.
Right.
They can say only Saudi ships are allowed, Qatari ships are not allowed, Emirati ships are not allowed, Kuwaiti ships are allowed to pass. Right? We will squeal. We will squeal MBZ directly. We hate Abu Dhabi. They're the ones who are closest to Israel. We're going to squeeze them specifically. They can do that now, and they can do that in perpetuity. Right? This is the Hormuz weapon. The power of the Hormuz weapon is not infinite when it comes to the world economy and the United States and the Western powers who can adapt and are very well endowed, and they have all sorts of resources. They can be fine. If they need to fight Iran for this, for control of Hormuz, they will. But the Gulf Arabs are completely exposed to Iran, and so we return to a kind of Iranian leadership or authority in the Gulf and power in the Gulf that is close to the 1970s, when the Shah was the regional policeman, but this was the case in which the Shah was America's guy.
Right.
Right. And now it'll be a defined hostile revolutionary state, anti-systemic state that is opposed to the Western power, that is opposed to the Western world order. And so this is a very, very dramatic development. And this is not a temporary development. Gideon Rockman, a very serious observer in the Financial Times, their main foreign affairs guy, he basically said, look, this weapon can only be put down. It cannot vanish. It is not going to disappear. Right? And that's absolutely correct. That is the source of Iranian regional hegemony. But let me also point out that it's not simply the choke point that is the source of the alpha here, so to speak. Right? That's the source of this power. It's Iranian strength itself. It's because Iran cannot be subdued by the United States militarily that it is possible for it to use and have and keep the Hormuz weapon. And that is why Iran is the new hegemon of the Gulf, because it is so powerful that the United States cannot subdue it.
Right.
So
I mean, yeah.
This we have discovered. This is a discovery, right? This is a military discovery, a military surprise that nobody knew. Even I didn't know that it would prove impossible for the United States to subdue Iran. But it has, which means Iran is much stronger than we thought it was. And which means that you can't relinquish away the Hormuz weapon from it. Ultimately, that weapon is just sitting there for it to use.
Right. And it kind of also seems that they are quite careful and let's say economical in the way that they make use of that weapon. And like with all the other weapons, like for example, they have so many other escalation steps that they could still go by, now hitting Qatar and Saudi Arabia energy sources. Or, for example, Bab al-Mandab, which is the area that can be closed off in a very similar way by the Houthis. So, yeah, it's really quite remarkable how hard it is to imagine how anybody will be able to open this up. Yeah, and
I've noticed many Western analysts say put forward Iraq in the 90s as a model for the future of Iran, and that is completely wrong. It's a misunderstanding of the balance of power here. You can't put Iran in the box that you put Saddam in. Iran is vastly more powerful than Saddam ever was. It's a really, people are still waking up to the fact and still slowly trying to coming to terms with the fact that, not only has the war failed, it has resulted in a vastly powerful Iran.
Yep. The question would be then, what does this mean for US, Israel? I mean, they were the regional hegemon in the Gulf until recently, at least, and militarily speaking, they were the strongest forces there. So do you envision that Iran can really achieve an exit of these forces out of the Middle East region? I mean, that's at least how they are, how they are saber rattling now, which is like, we want all of them out. And, they're approaching these countries and saying, we'll stop attacking you if you close your bases there or stuff like that. So is that what they're after? Do they want to get the Americans out?
The bases are militarily useless. They're useless now, and they are proven to be militarily useless because you have to evacuate them as soon as you want.
Yes.
So essentially, there's a zone of fire of 1,000 miles, and you can't approach a great power, a power that has precision strike armory that Iran does. You can't field your forces that close to that power, so these bases are useless. So yes,
just like the Lincoln aircraft carrier is like shipping around like 1,000 kilometers away.
They have to stay, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the coast of Iran, and this is just the important thing here. The really important theorist here is Andrew Kiprinovich, who was a very senior military thinker in the policy shop in the DoD, in the Department of Defense. He wrote about a mature precision strike regime, and what is becoming clear is what happens when you fight, when two powers that are that have these long distance hyper precise weapons, when they fight each other. So Iran was able to strike every single US radar in the region, which is extremely important because you can't conduct modern military operations without the eyeballs and ears that you get from these sensors and systems.
Or interception, right? Like the so-called Iron Dome is also based on many of these radars.
All of
right?
these. The interceptors rely on these radars. Your battlefield operations rely on these radars. So the US had to rush in E-3 planes, which are electronic reconnaissance planes, that they're big, these jumbo jets with like massive electronics sensors inside that do battlefield reconnaissance and surveillance. And so the United States had to rush 3 of them to the region because all its radars have been destroyed. All the air bases had to be evacuated, and they were attacked and destroyed. So the US forces had to rely on long distance flights from Europe and Crete and elsewhere, and Israel. So basically, US forces have been physically pushed back by Iran by at least 800 miles. Even 1,000 miles. And that's a very, very important and big development in a purely military sense, because that tells you how this will play out anytime this starts again, or with any other power that has similar strike capabilities. But the question is not merely military, it's a political question. Can the Iranians intimidate the Gulf Arabs, coerce them into accepting an Iranian-run order in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, right? And can they say, break your ties with the United States? You thought the United States was going to protect you from us. It is not, right? We've proven to you that it cannot protect you from us. So that question is an open question. We don't know whether the Gulf Arabs will continue to take support from the United States, host US forces in the future, and try to bring down Iran or whatever, or whether the Americans would be interested in that. With this president, it's clear that he can walk away, right? He can definitely walk away from the Saudis and Emiratis. Okay, fine. We don't want your checks anymore. We have enough money. You guys, you Arabs, you deal with the Iranians. But it is certainly possible that the United States gets kicked out from the region. But it is also possible that the United States will not tolerate that and will keep coming back and keep going until it reestablishes some kind of position. But that means a renewed conflict with Iran. That means the scenario where the United States get bogged down permanently in a struggle with Iran. And that's the scenario that the Chinese want.
I'm going to get back to the permanently of it. That's an important point, but maybe let's try to envision in a different scenario. Like, is there even any scenario? Like, if I were to ask you, is there any way that the US can win this? Like, is there a way where Iran can actually be defeated, the US go out and say, yes, we've achieved whatever our goals are. They might change, but we've won the war. Like, what do you see any scenario there? Is there
So
something realistic?
let me tell you what can work and what can't. There is no possibility that just bombing Iran is going to work. That's not going to happen. We bombed Germany for 3 years. This is just not something that you can do from the air. Okay, what about a ground war? I did the math on the ground war. The problem with the ground war is, suppose that you want to suppress Iranian fire by landing ground forces, combined armed forces, multiple divisions. They go and they crush in this army. The problem is that they will remain exposed until they occupy Iran fully and disarm Iran fully. Right? What is the force requirement for that? Iran is as big as the Western Europe. Iran is a country of 90 million people with 40 million men of military age who have received military training for 21 months.
And a horrible terrain, like it's not flat like Germany or something.
It's the worst mountainous terrain you can imagine for military operations, right? So we are looking at something of the scale of 1 million soldiers, something of the scale of 30, 40 divisions that would require for effective occupation. But the problem is, the United States can't actually field more than a dozen, 15 divisions. Like if it does the draft, it can 3 years down, it can field 15 divisions. Right now, it can send 6. 6 months down, it can send 8. 10 is where it completely tops off and it just cannot send anymore, right? And there's a division in Korea that the United States cannot withdraw without collapsing deterrence in Korea. There are 3 divisions in Europe. Maybe it can withdraw 1. And then there are, there's one in Japan that maybe you can withdraw. And then, but regardless, you're still left with this 11 divisions. And you can only field half of them at any given time because they have to recycle for maintenance and repairs and retrofitting, which means that you can field 6. You need 4 divisions for Tehran alone. Like this is an impossible military problem. So the idea that ground forces can occupy and topple this regime and replace it with a compliant regime and leave is not going to work. They can occupy it. In the United States, forces are very powerful. Ground forces are extremely powerful. There is no power on earth that can prevent, an American ground attack if it happens. However, that is not enough because as soon as you leave, they take over, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, right? Like there is no. You have to win the counterinsurgency war, and the possibility of that is 0. There is no possibility with the force to space ratios, force to population ratios that are required. It is an impossible goal to any military advisor who's advising this president, saying a ground war is winnable and we can win this war even though we lost it in Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam, is just lying. This is just for reference. Vietnam had 10 million men of military age. All of Vietnam, South and North combined. Iran has 40 million. American forces back then were nearly 2 million strong. We have 600,000 troops in uniform today who can be deployed. Like this is not a winnable war on the ground. Okay, so what is the path to success here? Is there one? There's one path to success, in my understanding, which is to win the interdiction war. If you can disable Iran's ability to produce and deploy missiles and drones, or at least if you can reduce it down to very low levels, tolerable levels that the insurers can eat and the Arabs can eat and the Israelis can eat, yes, you can win. But that interdiction math is extremely hard. It is extremely implausible to see how that works. So it is going to lose. And what that means is it is going to declare a ceasefire, agree to some sort of ceasefire, some sort of ceasefire.
Yeah, okay. Israel already mentioned a couple of times, I don't think Netanyahu did, but some folks in Israeli TV, they are talking about this constantly. And, Israel being like the kind of bad cop in this relationship between the US and Israel, or the mad dog or something. Many people are saying, yeah, if this goes south and it doesn't end soon, maybe Israel will just drop 20 nukes on Iran. And then Iran is done. How's that? How realistic is this? And would that be a way to a success?
So I've studied nuclear strategy at depth. I basically read every single author of the subject. This is just not a serious idea. I'll tell you why. The real trigger for nuclear use, nuclear weapons use for first use especially, is that the state is under existential risk. So there's one clear case in which we know that the Israelis came close. And that was in 1973, when Golda Meir's team thought that Israel's position was collapsing under assault from the Egyptian forces and so on. And they were really, really worried, and they were considering nuclear use. And so what they did was they unfurled their nuclear artillery and exposed them to Russian and American satellites to see. The Americans saw this. Kissinger sees this. Kissinger like, what the fuck are you doing, Golda? Right? And he immediately is like, okay, fine. I'll rush you some weapons. We're not going to let you fall, right? And so he does the largest airdrop of weapons in history in 1973, right? And you have to realize, like, why why did they use these nuclear weapons against Americans? Why didn't they use them and threaten Egyptians? They didn't even tell the Egyptians that they were doing this, right? Which tells you like how dangerous this is. This was just threatened very, very vaguely, very deniably. Now let's look at what happens in a first use scenario. Suppose that Israel drops nuclear weapons on this. One thing we can be certain about is nuclear proliferation. Immediately, the Saudis will decide they must necessarily have this weapon because Israel can use it against them, as it has just used against Iran. Same thing with the Turks. And you know how the Israelis are now going after the Turks, right? Turkey is the new Iran. So we're going to see proliferation almost immediately. So that neutralizes the Israeli monopoly on nuclear weapons. This is not in Israeli interest, right? It is also clear that even if you drop nuclear weapons, unless you completely wiped out the country, another state will emerge in Iran that will immediately seek nuclear weapons and will be in the same position. And you will have a much more difficult time deterring nuclear use by that state particular against you. And you have to realize that a single weapon or two in Israel is enough to wipe it out. Right?
Yeah, I know. It's a tiny country.
10 million people, a tiny fucking place.
Yes.
You can wipe out Israel with one or two weapons. You cannot wipe out Iran with 10 weapons.
Right.
So it's really hard to see how this makes any sort of sense, even from the Israeli point of view. Even if the United States was not like, what the hell are you doing, right? I mean, the United States will be absolutely fucking furious at this. Like they will go batshit crazy. And in fact, all the Western powers will freak the fuck out. This is not a serious option. The Israelis can't threaten to do this. And the reason why they can't is because they are not under existential threat. No matter what happens in this war, Israel is not going to not survive it. The only state under existential threat here is Iran. And so if the Iranians had a nuclear weapon, I would be worried about the first use scenario. Because you're threatening to kill them, right?
Right.
But there's no threat to Israel. Israel is not going to get wiped off the face of the map because the United States loses this war against Iran and has to eat this humiliating ceasefire, right? So the idea that nuclear use here is a serious scenario. A lot of people are saying this. Very serious people, in fact. John Mearsheimer, even Robert Pape mentioned nuclear escalation.
Right. Yes.
I don't agree. I think the threshold for nuclear escalation is extremely high. And I say that as someone who predicted Russian escalation threats in October 22. I wrote a very famous, it went completely viral and it was shared everywhere, including the White House and the National Security Council back in 22, which was basically that the Russian position has deteriorated so much in Ukraine. Their forces are facing a rout. And so there is a real chance that the Russians are going to resort to first use to basically deter and threaten to escalate further unless the Ukrainians and the Western powers back off, right? And then later the intelligence community, including the director of intelligence at the time, after they went out of office with the Trump election, conceded that we were told that there was a 50-50 chance that there would be first use by the Russians in that October. And so I was able to anticipate what the IC was looking at the same time,
Right.
And so I can tell you that I'm a very serious student of this. I think that people who are worried about this may are natural to worry because things are getting out of hand, but the threshold for nuclear use is extremely high, and the cost and risk associated by so high, it's just impossible to see. It's very, very, very difficult to see. Certainly at this stage, very difficult to see nuclear escalation.
All right. So also this is not really a way to win the war. So let's suppose that this is all right. And then it would seem that basically the world right now is at an impasse. The US bound to be defeated, but can't or won't admit it now. Iran can't or doesn't want to stop also because for it's actually a matter of its existence and survival. Israel doesn't have any interest in stopping at all as long as the US stays on board. It wants Iran destroyed. So how can this end? Is there an off-ramp here? Do you see any way out of this?
So
Because now it sounds like you said before, you said the word permanently. So it sounds like this could go on forever. Yeah.
So the only sort of, there are three possibilities here. One is that I am wrong and that the interdiction war can be won, and that this will become clear that you're winning the interdiction war, and it'll become clear from the reduced tempo of Iranian strikes. If the Iranians cannot launch more than a dozen missiles for 10 days straight, you know that you're winning the interdiction war. If the Iranians' drone strikes decline and are on an exponential decline, you know that you're winning the interdiction war. So it's an empirically verifiable fact. We will see if the United States can win the interdiction war in a very clear, obvious way. So that's a possibility. I may be wrong about my math. Maybe I'm wrong about Iranian capabilities. Maybe I'm wrong about American capabilities of interdiction and so on. It's possible. That's one possibility. The second possibility is that the United States cannot accept the Hormuz weapon, cannot accept Iranian hegemony in the Gulf, and will therefore launch a ground war that it will get bogged down in and lose, and it'll bleed, and the American army will get destroyed trying to hold Iran. That's a real possibility at this stage because of the imperial attitudes, right? They are unwilling and absolutely intolerant of an independent pole in Iran. So that's a real possibility. That I seriously cannot rule out because of the pressures on this, as in terms of what we understand of great power behavior at all, right? The third possibility is that the political costs, and this is my central scenario, the political costs are so high on Trump. The mounting cost, the triple dollar oil prices, and $150, $200. The whole world economy is catering. You're entering a massive stagflationary period. That could really force their hand. They could say, okay, stop this. Let's agree to whatever, right? And let's have these secret clauses in this, and we'll say we won. They'll say they won. We control the press. We'll figure out how to call this a victory, right? And that's a real possibility. And that to me is the central scenario, just because the costs and risks are so high of the alternate ground war scenario, and just because the interdiction math is so unforgiving and daunting.
Yeah, and then maybe to my last question, because I think in all three scenarios, one thing is clear, that a dramatic shift in the geopolitical order kind of has appeared. I think even now, only 2.5 weeks into this war, it's kind of clear. I like this one article where you're talking about, I don't know, the world order in a year from now or something like this, or in the future. So maybe let's pack out that crystal ball again, and let me ask you, what do you think will be some of the repercussions, the changes that we can already observe today? I mean, without painting too much of a picture, what do you think we should get ready for?
I think this is a historic strategic defeat, and a defeat of this magnitude, and a sort of war and a decision of this magnitude cannot but have massive repercussions on the entire order of the world. And I think that we are just barely starting to realize the full ramifications of this, right? So first thing that happens when the United States essentially loses this war is that deterrence in Asia collapses. If the United States cannot subdue Iran, there is no possibility of defending Taiwan, right? So deterrence in Asia collapses. Eventually, this leads to an American withdrawal from Asia. People may make a big deal out of it, but the United States will be fine. It'll still be a great power. It'll still be extremely rich. It'll be fine. The United States has already made it clear it's not interested in staying in Europe. It's handing over primary responsibility, as Colby put it, to the Europeans. That is going to accelerate because of the political fallout from this war and its catastrophe, right? So the United States is going to rebalance towards home, right? And towards the Western Hemisphere. So what is emerging, therefore, is a multipolar world where you really do have regional powers that are calling the shots in these regions, with Iran basically calling the shots. Even if Iran is kind of like, you put it in a kind of, you make it sign a bunch of agreements that it won't proliferate, it won't do this, it would never close Hormuz again, or whatever. You can put all those things in place, but it will reserve the right and the means to use the Hormuz weapon anytime it likes. And that's a new political order. That's a new power position. With the American exit from Asia, of course, the Chinese get to call the shots there, and the Chinese are a very responsible power, like the very, very serious power. Like this is not a Yahoo power like the United States. This is a very serious power, and so I'm much more hopeful that they will have a working, functioning, stable order in Asia. Just because ASEAN and all the countries of the region are so deeply embedded with the Chinese and value good working relations with them. So I don't see that problem that becoming very volatile, except for Japan. The Japanese are crazy people. Crazy people. They really want to fight the Chinese, right? And you're like, what the hell are these people doing? Like, they are much more aggressive than the Americans, even the American hawks. And so you really have to worry about a confrontation with Japan, because it'll become progressively harder and harder for the United States to defend Japan. Although that position could be held in perpetuity, to be honest. Just because Japan is basically a nuclear state, right? It's a nuclear weapon state. You could develop nuclear weapons in a week if it wanted. And they will almost certainly proliferate as soon as deterrence in Taiwan collapses and Taiwan is taken over. It is going to lead to Japanese proliferation almost on the same day. And so that nuclear equilibrium balance, nuclear balance power in northeastern Asia is one thing that I see happening coming from this. And then the United States comes back to this sort of world of hemispheric defense, largely because of political developments within the United States. That's complete discrediting of the lobby, the Israel lobby, and the hawkish elements in the national security discourse in Washington D.C. That they have been very dramatically discredited by the Iraq War, and now this is going to discredit them even more so, because this is bigger catastrophe than the Iraq War. And so that's a kind of hopeful thing, right? Because if the United States gets more responsible discourse in foreign policy, that's a very good thing. But certainly the American position in the world is getting eclipsed. U.S. authority in the world is collapsing. The United States is not trusted by anyone, and everybody is interested in finding an alternate, set of arrangements that are not anchored just on the most, out of control rogue power in the world. So things are moving very rapidly, I think, and we are in the midst of changes, and it is kind of shocking that middle power like Iran is the main catalyst of this development, but it seems very much like that is what is happening.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying here that already before, like a year ago or so, and when this NSS paper came out from the US, it seemed like that they realizing this emergence, or they literally say so, they realize that this emergence of this multipolar order and their reaction to it is to just much more directly make use of their force to establish keep up as much as they can from their hegemony. And by doing so, alienating the whole world and pushing everybody away, and then actually speeding that process of this creating multipolarity up. And Iran seems to be like a microcosmos of this development. Like in 2 weeks, the world has changed quite dramatically. Yeah.
And it's not, but the thing is, it's not just the Trump administration that's flailing around. Even the Biden administration was flailing around.
Right.
Their idea of preserving American primacy was, we are going to make the chips and we're going to own AI. And the AI is going to be so powerful that, we will dominate China. That seems to me completely harebrained. China has an industrial workforce, manufacturing value added, as large as Europe and America combined. They're installing 100 times as many robots as the West. This is not, I don't see how, with advances in machine intelligence and machine cognition, we're going to win this against China. If AI becomes extremely good, it will lead to a massive explosion in Chinese productivity, much more than our productivity. So it's just the idea that the United States can balance China in perpetuity seems harebrained to me. We are looking at a transition not to kind of just a multipolar world, but a lopsided multipolar world that's almost near unipolar, with China as the unicorn. That's the world that's emerging. And the issue seems to me that the Chinese are really, really kind of cool and, and not interested in providing functions, global functions of stabilization and order, right? If the Chinese really insisted on it, they have the power position to insist on a working security order in the Gulf, that no, the Gulf Arabs have to be secure, the Iranians have to be secure, the Israelis have to be secure, and we insist on a functioning order that does this, right? They could insist on it, but they're just not. They're
laying off, hands off. Yeah.
Do nothing win strategy, right? But that's not responsible. I don't think. I think at some point, states that become powerful kind of have responsibility thrust on them. They must provide the stability functions that are expected of great powers. Otherwise, things can go very badly for everybody concerned, including China.
Right. So we nearly ended on a slightly hopeful note and then broke that down again to that. No problem, but that's the world today. I mean, we can't, that's not our fault. Thanks so much, Anusar. It was great hearing your analysis, and let's have you back on soon, yeah? The developments will be fast.
Yeah. Very happy.
Great to have you. See you. Bye. Bye, Anusar.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.